Hey folks, it's Thursday, December 12th in the afternoon, and I am Rob, that developer dad. And so yesterday I started talking about and working on a way to manage mapping between the different types that we'll have in our composed system. And some of those types are just expressions of the same general concept within the domain. Like the SaaS admin project that I'm working on deals with customer profiles and their subscriptions and creating, modifying those subscriptions, et cetera, as requests to change those things come in from the outside world. The subscription or a customer represents their identity in my identity system. It represents the profile for the admin system and the application itself. It represents the subscription object that's stored with their profile and also managed by a third party merchant of record that I'll be integrating in probably starting next week. And so I've got all these different classes that represent the same overall concept or parts of that overall concept. And so far, I've just been manually mapping between all of these different versions to, the logical actual thing that makes the changes and then stores it back to wherever it needs to go and so on. And that manual mapping code is boring, really easy to get wrong. And you can write unit tests and integration tests until you're blue in the face. But if you've got a bug in your mapping logic, you're gonna have a heck of a time debugging it. And this is repetitive, and it's sort of the same looking code every bloody time. And it's boring. I like to automate the boring stuff. So how do I do that? Well, we've got this overall idea of a customer and their subscription and this and that and the other thing. Those ideas are operated on in different ways by various components within our system. Now, it's always a bad idea to just share the same class between all of these different components. It's always a bad idea because someday, and this is going to happen, the way a particular component works on that object is going to become significantly different from the way all of the other components look at and expect that object to look like, and so on. So you're going to get divergence of what these concepts look like from one component to the next over time. It happens. It's almost an inevitability in software construction that representations of your domain concepts are going to diverge from each other over time. I've been doing this a long time. It always happens. Full stop, period. So why don't we account for that potentiality at the start? Now, this thing that I'm doing, if you're just trying to noodle with something or prove that something is possible or try out some new technology or whatever, don't bother with all of this formal architecture stuff. If there is even a glimmer of a possibility that your experiment is that you're going to be pressured to release your experiment as real code available to the public, then it's not a proof of concept anymore. It's a minimum viable product. And that's a whole different thing. I could talk for hours on the difference between a proof of concept and a minimum viable product. Excuse me. We're dealing with a minimum viable product here. And we are dealing with code that is going to get deployed to production at some point. So I want some formality around what I'm doing. So I've got multiple representations of my customer object or my customer concept and the subscription concept and all of these other conceptual things. Now I'm going to stop using the word concept and start using the word domain entity. Now that sounds really formal, and it kind of is. The idea comes from ubiquitous language, which is a term used in domain-driven development to describe the terminology used within some domain in a common, plain language, accessible format, so that technical and non-technical people in an organization can use this ubiquitous language in discussions about the processes that affect these domain entities. A big mistake that I've seen made and have made myself in the past when I was first learning about domain-driven development was to actually have a formal software class that represents that domain entity. And that's gotten me in trouble because I end up with this omnipotent object that has every aspect that I could ever want to know about whatever entity I'm talking about. And then I'm trying to pass that around, and I get into the trouble where things start to diverge. And then the object gets bigger and bigger and harder to work with and more unwieldy, when it'd be much more practical to have local idiomatic representations of that domain concept. And so the experiment I'm doing here is recognizing that domain entities exist, and perhaps even formalizing the naming of the domain entity and the entity attributes. But I don't actually have a class that represents that whole domain entity. What I've done, and I'm just going to flip over to my screen share here, is in one of my framework projects. I have two. This one, that developerdad.ifx, is sort of global architecture and some global utilities. There is zero domain specificity in that developerdad.ifx. I can use that everywhere. Hey, what's up, Michelle? What's good? C# and .NET. That's what's good. That's what we're doing. And then I've got another, hey, oh, right on. Cool. So I'm not just screaming into the void over there. Michelle just found me on X because I try to remember to tweet out what I'm doing. Yes, that's me. Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah, after I finish my stream, I'll do a follow back. So for domain entities, what I've done is I've created a namespace inside my application-specific framework. And the application-specific framework is for holding concepts and values and variables that need to be used throughout the application. So I've got this SaaS app domain, and I need to rename this to SaaS domain. Boop. And I've got an application user. So the name of the entity, or I've got this public static class application user, and all these do, SaaS domain does nothing more than provide organized constants that describe the domain model and the entities from which it is built. All right, so I've got this application user, and all this does is give us the entity name of the application user and a list of the names of the attributes that an application user will have. Excuse me. And right now the entity attribute only contains the name. And I feel like I might have to get into some typing or some type descriptions for some attributes. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Between this morning's session and now, I've actually started building up a manifest of what these domain entities that I already have, and these domain entities are currently manifesting as local types within the various components of my system. I'm trying to find the commonalities here. So there's one more attribute on application user that I haven't added as a constant. And that public const string is subscription status. Yep. And we're just going to give it that. All right. Let's run back to our customer profile. I'm just going to pop in here and zip up to where I'm dealing with it. Customer profile response, customer profile, here we go. And I just want to go to the definition on this guy. So here's customer profile and customer subscription we're not ready for, but subscription status, we can apply an entity attribute. And because we've defined that concept, we can just go to entities, application user attributes, subscription status, and we've got that string value in there. That's pretty sweet. So now I want to start thinking about this external IDs, because I've got it's another thing that I need to map from wherever I get it to wherever I'm using it. And I've called this out as, I'm going to call the attribute correlation IDs, and it's actually a collection of domain entity external user ID, and it's expressed by user ID resource as well as external ID on the account manager. So let's see about coming back to our application user and public const string. And I believe I'm calling it correlation IDs equals correlation IDs. Fine. Excuse me. Run back over to customer profile. Decorate here. Entity attribute. There we go. Where's this coming from? Well, user account resource has a thing over here called external IDs. User account resource isn't yet recognized as a idiomatic type. So we're going to inherit idiomatic type. And all this is it's a base class that I created up in the main framework, or the the global framework in the domain utilities, all it does is it implements iDomain idiom and gives us some helper methods to read the attributes that I'm about to add. So here we are going to domain entity attribute. And let's say entity name is application user. Get rid of that. And this is actually, we got to bring in the taxonomy namespace from the service model. And this is a resource access. Or this idiomatic type is declared in a for a resource access component. Entity attribute is user ID, and let's not use this. Let's, using entities, we'll bring in the SAS domain static class, and we'll alias that to the term entities. Entities.application user entity name. Very good. There we go. Now we could shorten this up even further using app user props equals. And instead of having this big old long string, I can just say app user props, just to shorten that up. But then I got to scroll up here to see where the hell it's coming from. So I'm going to 86 that and just say entities dot app user application user dot attributes. There we go. Decorate this guy the same way. Decorate that. And let's decorate that. Save. Now, it's not going to be able to automatically map a user ID resource coming from user account resource to whatever we have on customer profile. It's not going to be able to map user ID resource to external ID. So let's define a new domain type. And to do that, I'm just going to come into domain constants, add a new file. Going to be a class. I'm going to call it SAS domain underscore. And let's call it external user ID. Public partial class, public static class, external user ID. And I'm going to get rid of these properties right here. Excuse me. And let's take a look at what one of those local representations looks like. We'll pick on external ID. We've got vendor and ID of vendor. So where was I? Here we are. Public const string And let's say remote system name. And I'm just going to call it ID at remote. All right, cool. So now we've got this. Let's come into external ID. We'll add some namespaces in a second. This becomes an idiomatic type. Bring in the namespace. Copy that, dot attributes, using entities equals, and GitHub Copilot remembers that that's where I'm stuffing that stuff. And I also need using that developer dad.ifx service model taxonomy. Let's start decorating. Look at that. Frickin' Copilot, man. I love you. Application user. This is not going to be an application user. This is going to be dot. Oh, I have to compile the. I'm going to have to compile my SAS admin. Build. There you go. And I might have done external user ID wrong. Public partial class, public static class. Okay. Oh, duh. Called it the wrong thing. Let's take a look over here. Yep, public partial class SAS domain. Yeah, I just named something wrong over here in my new file here. So let's save this, come back to external IDs, dot external user ID, dot entity name, comma. Cool. So component archetype manager, entities, external user ID, yeah. Here we go, remote system name, and then ID at vendor, ID at remote. Cool. And now I need to decorate in my resource access. That's for the catalog. Here's my user account. And all of this stuff is done inside the abstractions assemblies. So we can close the project file and just bring in here. And we want to decorate user ID resource. So first we need to bring in some using statements. Using that developer.ifx domain utilities, attributes, service model taxonomy, and entities. Groovy. And it's not an application user, but an external user ID declared on the resource access. Entity attribute is remote system name. And, nope, square brackets, entity attributes, ID at remote. Save. And one might think that's all we gotta do. Have we decorated user account resource? We have. Good. So, SAS domain application user, we can close that. User ID resource, we can close that. We'll keep customer profile open for now. Let's come into customer builder. And this is fetch and apply identity. Let's come into fetch and apply account information. Load user account async. And this is actually the account response. And profile under construction, dot apply account from account response. Well, what's going on in here? Let's go to the definition on this guy. Profile, account resource. Okay. Oh. And this actually is a resource. So I'm going to change that from response, because I'm not using a response pattern here. Account resource. There, that's a little better. Now that's one way to do it. And if we look in here, we'll go to the definition. If profile is null, we create a new one. Subscription resource is that part. And we convert that to a manager model. We set the status. We set the external IDs, blah, 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 blah. Fine, whatever. This isn't really going to work under the automatic mapping stuff. So let's fool around and find out. We'll do the new way under the old way. Old extension method way. Shiny new domain mapping way. Is domain mapper.map and our types. We probably no longer need to supply these type properties because we're supplying instances of the types. So let's just go boop. And we'll bring this up here. Save. So here's apply account from. Let's just comment that out. Drop a breakpoint here because we're only going to fool around so much. And let's see what we get. Save it. And yeah, just run. Run, you booger. Excuse me. All right, so we are up to profile under construction, domain object mapper.map. Here's our account resource. That's our source. Here's our profile under construction. It's our destination. Let's step in. So if destination instance is null, whatever, guard types are equivalent. I've got a different overload of this that I want to use instead. Let's shrink map filter. Yeah, here we go. Let's come up here, and I'm actually going to stop this. I did this small refactor earlier. So guard types are equivalent. Let's say source instance, destination instance. There we go. Cool. Now my source map, I no longer have to call getMappable properties because source instance dot entity properties. And destination instance dot entity properties. Save, intersect. And then here we just loop over those properties and do stuff. We're going to run into trouble here. This line is the one that's going to get us. All right? So let's try running again. Go. And we've got all of our happy framework dependency building that we can see happen down here. We're up here. Let's step in. We know our destination instance is neither null nor default. We're good here. We can just bounce over that. Guard types are equivalent. We're good here because the source instance, the entity name is application user. The destination instance is application user. That's pretty fancy, isn't it? And we'll get the source map. There's 4 properties defined on our source map: user ID, display name, subscription status, and correlation IDs. 4 properties displayed on destination instance. We've got user ID, display name, subscription status, and correlation IDs. Here's another little guard clause to make sure that we've got at least one key in common. And let's start stepping. So the source property is user ID. We know we're good here. And our source key here is correlation IDs. The source value is a user ID resource. The destination property type is a list of stuff. External ID, I think it's called. This is going to blow up real good. Or not. I think it just exploded. Yeah, destination property set value, argument exception, object of type, list of user ID resource cannot be converted to type, list of external ID. So what we need to do excuse me, is find a way to signal to this code here. This works fine for simple single value properties. For collections or properties of complex types, we need to do something else. I'm going to put that comment there. There we go. Save. We're going to need additional information on the entity attribute to guide what we do here. So what do we do? Well, let's close up sasadmin.ifx. Come into dev.ifx in our domain utilities. Let's take a look at this entity attribute. So we've got our entity attribute name, and it's just a public property. We're going to need to add a couple other properties. Public bool is collection attribute. And it's going to be just a get. And in order to set that, let's just say is collection. Bool is collection equals false. Public string and the entity attribute, let's say well, we've got the domain entity right here. Entity name, component archetype, blah, 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 blah. So string, and this is going to represent the type when we're dealing with a complex type. And value entity name, get, and finally, public bool is value entity. This is just going to be a little helper. Return value entity name does not equal that. What are you complaining about? string dot is null or white space. Value entity name is false. And the compiler is giving me a hint. Use block body for property. Use value entity method. You know what? Let's just go with the expression bodied property for this. And then we need to add a nullable string, value entity name. And is collection is that, value entity name is that. And I think we've got enough infrastructure to be able to work in the object domain mapper again. So, source value. Entity attribute. Now let's call it attribute info equals source property dot get customer attribute, entity attribute. All right. I'll just pop that down on a new line and indent it here. And we know that this property has that attribute because otherwise it wouldn't be in our collection. If attribute info dot is collection or attribute info dot is value entity, get fancy. Otherwise, and we'll just bump those in by one and do that. So, first thing we got to do is we have to find the two properties that the properties that we need to work with. So we'll shrink that up for now. Let's come out to user ID resource. This is fine. These are just simple types. But on the user account resource, it's not name of. I think it's go to definition. Entity attribute name. Entity attribute name. And we could probably unsmurf type that. We will. We'll get there. Is collection is true. And entities dot external ID dot entity name. And what did I call that? Let's look over here. External user ID. external user ID dot entity name. There we go. Excuse me. Save. And then that's for our user ID resource. And we're going to need to come down to come into our manager's contracts. Nope, not the external ID contract, but the customer profile contract. Here's our correlation IDs. Entity attribute name is that. Come out to the end, give it a comma. It is a collection. External user ID. There we go. And now we've just given the domain object mapper some hints about how to do the thing. How do we map from one value entity to another value entity? We've got our source value. All right. I am going to change source value . No, I'm not. Object, question mark, destination value. All right. Destination value equals source value. All right. Now let's move this guy. Cut that. Paste it here. And instead of source value, we're going to grab destination value. Drop it here. We have to initialize it to null here. Simple non-collection, non-entity values can be directly assigned. All right, no problem. In here, we need to attribute info is collection. And the value entity. Hello, Mr. Camera. I don't know why it likes to. Oh, it's looking at the cat. All right. So first thing we need to do is create a function that will map source value a single instance of the source to the destination. Single instance of the source attribute value to the destination attribute value. And I almost want to pull this out into another method because this is going to get complex and goofy. Excuse me. Thinking. Because my brain's getting a little bit tangled up here. What we're going to need to do is destination value equals no. Because we're going to get recursive here. I'm just trying to figure out when. And we've got a couple of different options. We might have a collection of simple types. We might have a collection of value entities or entity values. We might have a single, like a property that is a single instance of some entity value. I'm going to rename this is entity value. Let's go that route. And I'm actually going to come in here. Okay, good. Is entity value. Well, then what the heck was it complaining about out here? Oh, it's just a temporary goofball thing. So, rebuild. I bet we can run this and it won't blow up this time. Let's do that because we're setting destination value to null. And then if we're dealing with a complex or a collection attribute, we're just going to ignore it for now until tomorrow. Let's run it. Make sure that this actually delivers the goods for us. Here we are. We'll step in, do all of our checking and our comparison building. Do straight assignment. This one, let's display name, straight assignment. Straight assignment. What's our source key? Correlation IDs. This is where it's going to just do nothing. Our destination value is null. Assign it and go. And we've finished executing that map. So here's what we're going to do. We've set ourselves up for success in mapping complex properties that are identified as, idiomatic types of our domain entities. Blah, 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 big words. I am going to independently go about just figuring out how to do that complex mapping. When I finally figure it out, it's going to be a slaphead moment, and I'm going to go, oh, duh. But I'm going to have to do some gymnastics and some hard thinking and muttering to myself that I don't want to subject y'all to. So I'm going to do that offline, and we'll talk through it tomorrow. And then we're going to continue. Well, no, I mean, I've already, you know what? I'm going to do the actual implementation offline, talk through it and explain it tomorrow or in the next video if you're watching this not live. And then I'm going to continue applying this domain entity concept to the rest of the properties and subproperties and types and so on in my customer profile definition. And we're starting to look a little bit cluttered, but honestly, we're not really going to be coming into this customer profile class very often unless we're adding to it. In our day-to-day lives, when we're building the components, we're going to be working out here. And we don't even see all of that mapping stuff, just the domain object mapper.map instead of some crazy bloody extension method or what have you. I dig it. I dig it quite a lot. Now, one last thing. There is slight performance cost when you're using this instead of like a direct imperative one property at a time, assign. In terms of time and processor cycles, doing the old-fashioned extension method like I'm doing everywhere else already before I came up with this concept is faster. In terms of microseconds. We're talking a couple hundred millionths of a second difference between doing it this way and doing it the direct imperative way per execution. Over the course of a year, we might see, if we're doing this a million times a day, it's gonna be an extra second or two in processing time over the course of a whole day. In terms of writing the code, I expect that this strategy is going to save me, if it's just me, it's going to save me weeks of effort over the course of a development project. It's going to save a team that I'm working with that's using this concept potentially person months, depending on the complexity of the project and the size of the team. And I don't know if you know how expensive developers are. In the United States, you're looking at anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000 per developer per month, and that's just in the check you write to them. It doesn't include all of the business taxes and all of that stuff. It's a significant savings, a very significant savings. For me, it's going to save me a boatload of time when I start applying this. Once I've got it retrofit into my applications and start using it as a go forward type thing, it's going to save me days of effort on a project that would normally take weeks if I weren't doing it a couple hours at a time and narrating every step as I go. I'll take a couple extra seconds of CPU execution time over the course of a day if I get to save that much real human my time. So I'm not going to sweat microseconds of performance difference. Until next time, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for paying attention. Thanks for watching. I am that developer dad, and I hope you are picking up some tips that are going to help you in your own projects and stuff. Till next time, happy coding. Take care.